Canada was stuck in a defense dilemma that no one seemed able to solve. The delays in the F-35 program, the rising costs, and the growing political pressure had pushed Ottawa into a corner. For years, the government tried to justify the F-35 purchase, but the numbers never balanced. The maintenance demands kept rising, and the Arctic deployment challenges remained unsolved. No one expected that Sweden would step in with a move bold enough to shake the entire North American defense conversation. When Sweden officially offered Canada 88 Gripen E fighters under what they called a strategic advantage package, defense experts around the world were stunned. This was not just another fighter jet sale. This was an attempt to shift the balance of air power decisions across the continent. Sweden wasn't simply selling a jet, it was offering Canada a new path, one that challenged the monopoly of American defense giants. The Gripen offer came with multiple layers. The public saw the aircraft, but the real shock was buried underneath the technical details. Sweden offered full technology transfer, Canadian assembly lines, long-term industrial partnership, and the promise that Canada would gain near-complete sovereignty over its fleet. No foreign lock-ins, no secret software codes, no permanent dependency. For Canada, this was a rare opportunity. The country had long struggled with the limitations placed on foreign aircraft. Every time Canada bought American fighters, it gained power in the skies but lost authority on how to upgrade, modify, or even operate those jets independently. Sweden broke that pattern by offering something no one else dared to offer: total operational freedom. The second surprise was that the Gripen E was specifically optimized for harsh environments similar to Canada's Arctic. Short takeoff capability, cold weather resilience, ultra-low operating cost, and rapid turnaround time made it uniquely suited for northern missions that even the F-35 struggles with. Canadian military analysts had repeatedly warned that the F-35's heavy maintenance needs would be a nightmare in isolated Arctic regions. The Gripen, meanwhile, was built from day one for rugged terrain, highway landings, and rapid deployment from remote bases. But the biggest shock was hidden from the public eye. Internal Canadian defense documents revealed that operating 88 Gripen E fighters for 30 years would cost nearly half of what 88 F-35s would cost. The budget difference was massive, big enough to fund multiple national defense programs simultaneously. For a country like Canada, where defense budgets are constantly under pressure, this was not a small detail. It was a game changer, and Sweden knew exactly what it was doing. This offer was not accidental. It was a strategic push to break into a market long dominated by the United States. If Canada accepted Gripen, other US allies could follow. The real battle wasn't just about fighters, it was about influence, access, and global military partnerships. Canada suddenly found itself at the center of an unexpected rivalry. The US quietly increased diplomatic pressure, while Sweden doubled down on its offer, insisting that Canada deserved an aircraft built for its unique geography and not just for alliance politics. The tension was rising fast. And just when analysts thought the situation had reached its peak, Sweden revealed something even more surprising, something that changed everything about the offer and made the world ask, is Canada really about to break tradition and pick the unexpected fighter? As Canada reviewed Sweden's proposal, more classified information began to leak from Ottawa's defense committees. What surprised analysts the most was that Sweden wasn't just offering aircraft, it was offering Canada a chance to become a major aerospace power alongside Saab. According to insiders, Saab proposed setting up a full production and upgrade facility directly in Canada. That meant Canadian engineers would assemble, test, maintain, and even modernize the Gripen fleet on Canadian soil. This was unheard of. The United States has never allowed Canada to build or modify F-35s independently, mainly because the F-35's classified technology must remain under strict American control. Sweden, however, had no such restrictions. They made it clear that the Gripen was designed to be an independent fighter, capable of operating without relying on foreign approval. For a country like Canada, which values sovereignty, this was more than appealing. It was empowering. But that was just the beginning. Sweden's offer included deep Arctic integration, heated hangar modules, mobile support units that could deploy across frozen regions, and specialized cold weather avionics packages designed specifically for the Northern Hemisphere. Sweden understood that the future of Canadian defense was in the Arctic, a region becoming increasingly contested with rising Russian activity. Gripen's rugged design and low logistical footprint gave it a clear operational advantage in those environments. Another factor that stunned Canada's analysts was how cheap the Gripen was to operate. Sweden revealed long-term data showing that Gripen E flight hour costs were less than half half of the F-35. In practical terms, this meant Canada could fly more hours, train more pilots, and maintain a larger operational force without destroying its defense budget. For a country already struggling to meet NATO spending targets, this advantage was enormous. However, the real shock unfolded behind closed doors. Sources inside the Royal Canadian Air Force confirmed that the Gripen performed exceptionally well in simulated Arctic defense drills. Even in extreme scenarios involving GPS jamming, runway loss, and radar disruption, the Gripen maintained operational capability. Its electronic warfare suite, particularly the Arexis system, gave it an advantage in electronic combat scenarios that surprised many in Ottawa. Meanwhile, American diplomats quietly increased pressure on Canada. Reports indicated that U.S. officials warned that choosing the Gripen might complicate future defense cooperation under NORAD. This created a political storm. On one hand, Canada needed the best aircraft for its territory. On the other hand, rejecting the F-35 could affect the country's defense relationship with its most important partner. Sweden responded brilliantly. They reassured Canada that Gripen could seamlessly integrate with NORAD systems and even offered to develop custom interoperability packages. Officially, the United States didn't reject this claim, but they didn't support it either. The silence raised even more questions in Canadian political circles. Then came Sweden's boldest move yet. They proposed a special agreement where Canada could co-develop future Gripen technologies, radar modules, electronic warfare blocks, communication systems, and even next-generation weapons. In other words, Canada wouldn't just be buying a fighter jet, it would be joining Sweden in shaping the next decade of advanced military aviation. For a nation often stuck buying off-the-shelf equipment from allies, this was a historic opportunity, a chance to influence real fighter jet development, not just purchase the final product. With tensions rising and international attention growing, Canada now faced the most dramatic fighter jet decision in its modern history. But the most shocking twist, the one no analyst predicted, was still yet to be revealed. As Canada's evaluation process moved into its final stage, something extraordinary happened, something that turned the entire fighter jet competition upside down. Sweden revealed a classified component of its offer that had been kept hidden until the right moment. This was the turning point that analysts later described as the move that changed everything. Sweden officially announced that it was willing to give Canada full source code access to the Gripen-E's mission systems. This meant Canada would have complete control over how the aircraft's radar, sensors, weapons, and communication suites were programmed. No restrictions, no locked systems, no external approval required. In modern aerial warfare, source code is the real weapon, the brain that controls the aircraft. The United States never shares this level of access, not even with its closest allies. But Sweden was ready to hand it over. This single detail sent shockwaves across Ottawa. For decades, Canada had struggled with limited access to U.S. fighter technology. Every upgrade, every integration, every software tweak required American approval. With Gripen, for the first time in modern history, Canada would truly own its fighter jets. It was complete sovereignty, something no one expected Sweden to offer. At the same time, the geopolitical landscape was shifting. Russia had increased its patrols near the Arctic, China was expanding its polar research stations, and climate change was opening new sea routes. The Arctic was turning into a global hotspot, and Canada needed a fighter that could dominate that environment. Gripen's ability to operate from icy roads, small forward bases, and remote locations suddenly became more valuable than ever. Then came the financial revelation. Sweden's final cost projection showed that over a 30-year lifespan, Canada could save tens of billions of dollars by choosing Gripen, not millions, billions. Enough money to invest in drones, satellites, naval upgrades, and Arctic infrastructure, all without sacrificing air power. The numbers were so dramatic that several Canadian lawmakers publicly questioned whether the F-35 was financially sustainable at all. Inside the Royal Canadian Air Force, pilots were split. Many were impressed with the Gripen's agility, electronic warfare strength, and low-maintenance design. Others argued that staying aligned with U.S. technology under NORAD was strategically safer. The debate became intense. Every major news channel, every defense forum, every political commentator was suddenly talking about one question: is Canada really going to choose the Gripen? Meanwhile, Sweden continued to push the offer with calm confidence. Saab released new simulation results showing Gripen outperforming expectations in Canadian-style intercept missions. They highlighted the aircraft's ability to operate with minimal ground crews, a huge advantage in remote bases like Inuvik and Goose Bay. And to add even more pressure, Sweden announced it would include a guarantee that Gripen E could be upgraded locally for the next 40 years. But the final twist, the twist that shocked even international observers, came from Sweden's Ministry of Defense. They quietly proposed a joint Canada-Sweden Arctic Air Superiority Initiative. This program would share intelligence, develop new cold weather technologies, and even co-create future drones specifically designed for snow-covered operations. It wasn't just a fighter jet offer anymore. It was a long-term strategic partnership. For Canada, this changed everything. This wasn't just about picking a plane. It was about picking an identity. Choosing Gripen meant choosing sovereignty, independence, and Arctic specialization. Choosing the F-35 meant choosing deep integration with the United States and staying aligned with the world's most powerful air power network. Canada's decision would shape the next 40 years of national defense, and both options carried massive consequences. As analysts waited for Ottawa's final announcement, one thing became crystal clear. Sweden hadn't just offered Canada a fighter jet, it had offered Canada a future. And for the first time in decades, Canada had the power to choose between two completely different visions of its military destiny. The world now watches closely, wondering which direction Canada will take, and whether the Gripen surprise will become the most unexpected shift in modern air power history. As Canada moved closer to the final stages of its fighter selection, something unexpected occurred inside the halls of Parliament. A confidential report titled Arctic Long-Term Threat Assessment 2050 was leaked to several journalists. The report highlighted a scenario where Canada could lose operational control over its northern skies if it relied entirely on foreign-dependent aircraft systems. Though it didn't mention the F-35 by name, the implications were clear. Dependency on another nation's software, codes, and maintenance approval could become a strategic vulnerability. This leak changed the tone of the entire discussion. Suddenly, the Gripen wasn't being seen as just an alternative. It was being viewed as a potential solution to a national security weakness that no one had openly acknowledged before. Meanwhile, Sweden intensified its diplomatic outreach. Saab representatives visited aerospace centers in Toronto, Winnipeg, and Montreal, stating that Canadian industry could gain thousands of high-tech jobs through long-term collaboration. They emphasized that Gripen's open architecture design made it perfect for Canadian universities, defense labs, and private companies to innovate together. This stood in stark contrast to the F-35's heavily restricted systems. Behind the scenes, Canadian engineers who reviewed Saab's technical presentations began to express admiration for the fighter's modular design. One engineer described it as a fighter built like Lego. Everything can be swapped, upgraded, and modernized without waiting for another country's approval. That kind of praise rarely appeared in public, but internally, it carried weight. Then, a new revelation added heat to the already intense debate. A defense briefing disclosed that Sweden was willing to let Canada integrate any weapon of its choice into the Gripen, American, European, or even Canadian-made. The F-35, however, required U.S. approval for every single weapon integration. This raised a simple but powerful question in Ottawa. Should a foreign country decide what weapons Canada can or cannot use? Public opinion began shifting. Defense forums exploded with discussions, and military analysts on Canadian TV began openly questioning whether the F-35's stealth advantage was worth giving up long-term independence. Gripen's advocates argued that the fighter's exceptional electronic warfare capability, low operating cost, and Arctic adaptability made it more suited to Canadian missions. At the same time, certain U.S. officials subtly hinted that rejecting the F-35 could affect cooperation in other defense programs. This caused political shockwaves. Some Canadian leaders were uncomfortable with the idea that their choice of fighter jet was being pressured through diplomatic channels. Sweden responded by reassuring Canada that its defense decisions should reflect its national interest, not the preferences of larger allies. Then came the most dramatic moment yet. A retired Canadian Air Force commander published an open letter stating that Gripen's ability to operate from Canada's vast network of civilian highways could be crucial if major bases were targeted or disabled. He explained that in real wartime conditions, runway independence could determine which Air Force survives the first strike. This letter went viral within hours. The public narrative shifted again. Now the discussion wasn't just about technology, it was about survival, sovereignty, and strategic realism. As days passed, Sweden released even more performance data showing how Gripen's low infrared signature, advanced countermeasures, and agile supercruise performance made it deadly in near-peer engagements. The data showed a fighter built not for show, but for real conflict scenarios. With pressure mounting, Canada quietly expanded its evaluation team and requested more detailed simulations from both competitors. Insiders claimed that Gripen exceeded expectations in long-range intercept missions, the very missions Canada performs most often. By now it was obvious. Canada was no longer comparing two fighter jets. It was comparing two futures. One future where Canada relied heavily on a global superpower for decades, and another where Canada stood shoulder to shoulder with Sweden, shaping the future of Arctic aviation with full independence. As the final decision approached, experts around the world realized something extraordinary. This was no longer just a procurement choice. This was a test of Canada's identity, its sovereignty, and its vision for the next half-century of national defense. And the world waited, because the next chapter would decide whether Canada would follow tradition or make one of the boldest defense decisions in its history.